culture. The words, where did they go? Lost in a forgotten dream, submerged into decaying landscape. Once we believed. Once we were knight errants on a mission from God. This before the noise of the machine drowned out hope. Before the lies of the media told us what to think. No one fired for the bandwagon of war in Iraq. No one prosecuted for the bank fraud of 2008. Where do we take our stand? Amy Goodman speaking out, as I look into the nod of the frozen quad landscape. Snow over the valley as Japs drive their Mercedes, oblivious to the exhaust of the fumes that make the sky so dirty. As the white-collar criminals come off the train, so confident in the fees they make for the fraud they perpetrate, I am calling for an open culture.
And she's back here talking and describing. And it's so important to hear that because I think it shames people. What can we do? And actually, you don't have to risk your life. You have to be smart about this because, for example, Ebola. Cuba has sent 160-something healthcare workers. That was their first batch. Now they sent another something like 50 of them, 60 of them. Even the Washington Post headline said, I think Cuba has sent like 11 million people. Cuba is punching above its weight. So they sent a third of the foreign healthcare workers to Western Africa. A third, this teeny country. Thank God we have cut them off with an embargo for half a century. I mean, look at the army of people they're sending. It is very threatening. It's threatening in that it puts us to shame. It is, even if we act completely in self-interest and don't and with the proposition that these countries like Liberia and Guinea and Sierra Leone be cordoned off, that we have a travel ban to these countries, as I heard some congressmen talking about. Even if you said, well, I don't care if we're mean-spirited, but what about just acting in total self-interest? You try to cut off countries like this, the epidemic will absolutely explode and will hurt us gravely. Even if it's not about helping your neighbor or those things that we learned to do as we're growing up. It's a terrible, terrible mistake. Now, President Obama has just chosen Ron Klain, I think his name is, who is the former chief of staff of Vice President, to be the Ebola czar. You might say, well, I don't know if that's so bad. You want someone to be in charge to really start to figure out how to deal with this. Okay, so who would that be? Well, what about the Surgeon General? Right, that would be a good idea. Who knows who the Surgeon General is? We don't have one. Why? President Obama nominated a Surgeon General, but the NRA was very upset, the National Rifle Association, because this nominee had expressed support for gun control. So as a result, we don't have a top healthcare person in this country who would use his or her bully pulpit to talk about what we have to do. Now, we had Larry Gostin on. He is a chief public health expert at Georgetown. We've had him on a few times. He specializes in quarantine. And I asked him about this Dallas Health Presbyterian Hospital. Everyone said it was one of the best, very important that Duncan went there, but Eric Duncan died in the hospital, right? He went there first, he was turned away, and then he went back and it was too late. His nephew, Emmanuel Weeks, wrote an op-ed piece about him and said, my uncle was a poor black man who went into a hospital, said he was from Western Africa, He had a, 103-degree fever, and they sent him home with Tylenol. He had no insurance. I think what Ebola has done is expose the healthcare systems, not only of our country, but around the world, and the crisis we face, that the World Health Organization, the World Health Assemblies have cut to the bone an infrastructure that we desperately need. Why is there no vaccine? Because private companies, why develop it? Even if eventually something like Ebola will strike, as it has, it's poor people in Africa who suffer from it. They won't be able to pay. That's why we need a public health infrastructure. So now the National Institutes of Health is developing it. It's late, we have a real crisis on our hands, but we need this all over the world, and especially in the United States. So Gostin said, when I said, well, I guess we'll find out what happened at Presbyterian, and then why 2 healthcare workers got sick. Immediately they blamed the person the lowest level of the totem pole, or the lowest level, and that is the nurses. Right, the first one was the nurse didn't convey the information. Then we find the nurse did convey the information. Then a nurse got sick, and the next nurse dared to fly to Cleveland and came back. And you're thinking, how selfish, how crazy. If they were told to stay home, why did she fly to Cleveland and then come back? Oh, then you learn that she repeatedly called the CDC both ways and said, is it okay if I go to Cleveland? Now, she then has been sent to Atlanta, to Emory, because this hospital can't seem to really come up with a basic protocol. And then we learned that the nurses were saying, we have got, when he came back by ambulance, Duncan came back by ambulance, we've got to isolate this guy. And the management said no. So they were right every step of the way, as so often nurses are, because they're closest to the patients. But when I was talking to Gostin, I said, what happened? I guess we'll find out soon. And he said, actually, you won't. Because although the CDC said they'd set up a SWAT team that could go to any hospital, these are private hospitals, they're not going to call them in. And they're not going to let them investigate. And that goes to the issue of private health care in this country. So all of this, has shed a spotlight on our broken healthcare system, but also the very brave people who are trying their best and are working to help other people. That's what gives me hope.
I have one more question, and I think we'll open it up. And I told my grad students I would pass this on. So I teach this course where students learn how to design community-based creative writing workshops, so that they can go into prisons, hospitals, elsewhere, and teach writing. And so we watched a couple of episodes of Democracy Now!, some segments last week in class. One where you had Angela Davis on, one which was just a few weeks ago when you were in Texas. And then, after I wrote this question today, you had a segment on this new law that's been passed in Pennsylvania. And so, I was driving here listening to the podcast on the day of the Texas show, and information came out about this recruitment, this center that's being built to house immigrants, an immigrant detention center in Texas. That the size of it struck me coming to school that day, was larger than the college that I teach at. Like, they were going to house more people than Manhattanville College has as a student population.
How many students?
The detention center was 2,500,
right.
And our undergrad population is significantly under that. Oh, sure. And so the size of this just seems so enormous to me. And you continue to cover these issues around the prison industrial complex. Why is that important for listeners to hear about what's going on in the prison system?
We have proportionally the largest prison population in the world. That is astounding, and there's so many issues that go along with that. Today, as you mentioned, we're supposed to have Mumia Abu-Jamal on from prison. It could be the last interview he does as this law is passed that says that prisoners may not be able to speak out if it hurts the victim or the victim's family. This is a huge problem, and but fortunately, Noah Hanrahan of the prison radio had recorded his response to this law yesterday, so we were able to broadcast it. When I heard you were going to ask me about the Immigration Detention Center, I did what I always do, is turn to the producers or the experts, and I just asked Renee Feltz, who was with me in San Antonio, you know, a real military town, and that's where we broadcast from 2 weeks ago, from Trinity University, and all the students were the crew. We had a wonderful time. Renee is from Houston, Texas, and the night before I was speaking at Trinity, she went to the Immigration Detention Center, the Corns Center, and interviewed a mom and her daughter who had just gotten out because of tremendous public outcry. The daughter's 9 years old, she has cancer, and she was in the prison, she was in the detention center for immigrants. The mother had brought her daughter to the United States to be treated. She had a brain tumor. And only because there was so much attention were they let out. So I texted Renee just now before we came up, and I said, what would you say about the whole system, the immigration detention system? And she said, expansion under Obama is major regression. We used to welcome asylum seekers, now we jail them without bond. Detention centers have cribs. They have cribs. So there's the Corns Center that has 500 beds, and that's the GEO Group, second to largest prison, private prison company in the United States. It's so frightening when you have private corporations running prisons, whether it's a regular prison or it's an immigration prison, because they decide how much profit they'll make. So if we give you less meat or one fewer slice of bread a day, we'll make more money if we're the owner of the prison. You'll be hungry, but we'll make money. So human beings become the commodity of a corporation. And we see what's happening. You know, the Corns facility, there was just a suit filed because so many of the immigrant women have been sexually assaulted by the guards who were hired by this private prison facility. You know, they are terrified, these women. They've already come over the border. They've already been terrorized. They're trying to protect their children. Of course they're going to do anything to protect their families and not to be sent back. They're so afraid as they flee the violence, as they flee the poverty. And make no mistake about it, I see a lot of you who may remember what happened in the 80s and the whole sanctuary movement and the U.S. support for the right-wing death squads in Latin America and Central America. This is the next generation. You know, from those right-wing death squads, the modern-day incarnation of them are the drug lords and the drug gangs, and people are still fleeing. And they're then taken here and they're put in detention. These are not criminals. And it's important to show this and to show the regular prison system. If you haven't read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, it is a book not to be missed. Michelle Alexander, clerk for Judge, Supreme Court Justice Blackmun. She is a professor now at University of Ohio or Ohio State. She lives in Columbus. It's a fantastic book, and it really shows us the disparity in this country and the different worlds we all live in. You know, for the African American community, prison is a pervasive institution, affects so many. And the fact, and it goes beyond that, and the fact that we have so many prisoners in this country. And on the car ride to Purchase, I was being interviewed by Austrian journalists for the trip this weekend. And I was talking about death row. You know, we began with Mumia Abu-Jamal. He's off death row. He was on it for like 29 years. You know, this is anathema to, for example, Europe. We're the only industrialized country in the world to have the death penalty. And that is part of the prison system. And the story in state after state right now, as European drug companies refuse to allow their drugs to be used to kill people in the United States. That has meant that state prison facilities have had to scramble to get the poison to kill their death row prisoners. And they are bartering and sharing, and we as the public are not allowed to know what's done in our name. So you have this obscene situation, for example, with Oklahoma and Texas. This was exposed by the Colorado Independent, and we were just broadcasting from Denver. But this email trail was exposed, and Oklahoma, I believe it was Oklahoma, was asking Texas, or maybe it was the other way around. Texas emailed Oklahoma and asked for some of their drugs to inject in the Texas prisoners. And the Oklahoma head of corrections said, we'll give you the drugs if you give us tickets to the home game between University of Texas and University of Oklahoma. It is absolutely essential that when we have the largest prison population in the world, that we have an independent media that exposes what's going on behind bars. And it becomes increasingly difficult when laws like the one in Pennsylvania are passed that say, under the guise of protecting victims, that you will not be able to hear from the prisoners. This is what we as journalists, and I think you as citizens and non-citizens perhaps here, but citizens of the world, have to challenge.
black, dark red, and blues. Boom ba bum booty, boo boo bee bum ba da boo bee, spado bee bum ba da, speak ba ba boo doo, spado da bee da ba boo doo dee da, spado da da boo boo boom 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 boom. Drawing unemployment is like drawing straws. Drawing unemployment is like drawing straws. We come up short under rich folks' laws. Living on nothing while hunger works full time. Living on nothing while hunger works full time. No wonder some brothers stumble into crime. And the rich cry, crime, crime, crime every day. And the rich cry, crime, crime, crime every day. While cocaine is being trafficked by the CIA. Yeah. We've been slaving for the masters, and what we get, we've been slaving for the masters, and what we get. Stack of papers to fill out asking dumb shit. State here the reason you're out of work. Answer the following, then report to the clerk. Will you accept work in your usual trade? What's your income with benefits paid? Do you own a farm or a ranch? Do you have a savings? What branch? Did you look for work all this past week? Where did you go? With whom did you speak? Are you a citizen of the U.S.? If answer no, then why not yes? Anyone in line who voluntarily quit, step out, go over there and sit. Sorry, you can't be seen until 10, provided you fill this out for when. We've been slaving for the masters and what we get. We've been slaving for the masters and what we get, appointment with revolution when we fit.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the poet. Thanks for the Black Agenda team for showing up. And thank you, Riverside Church.
Humility is fatal. We trick ourselves. Hey, look, we have to believe, true or not. No one listens to a Debbie Downer, said the Times. Silly illusions rule our lives, and that's the way we want it. But money makes of math a battering ram. And science is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So we have to be serious, but then we lose the silliness war and we're overthrown by the lying liars that tell them. We've killed ourselves with kindness. The addiction to the washing machine forces our suicide by energy OD, and our American dream makes a god. Out of a Weasley little rich bastard. We never clean up after ourselves. We never spend as much effort undoing bad laws as we spend writing new ones, just as bad. We will never accept the fact that driving our cars is killing our grandkids. We love to argue. We hate to agree. We'd rather be right. The more special we believe we are, the worse we behave. In a world that needs humility above all things, humility is fatal.